friends. Nobody likes you. Not listening. Not listening.
Welcome to ScreenCrush, I'm Ryan Airy. So, the Lord of the Rings trilogy is a masterpiece, and overall, the Hobbit trilogy is, well, I don't want to sound too hyperbolic, but the Hobbit trilogy is an insult to human existence.
Cowards. Not every man's brave enough to wear a corset.
Now, I'm not here to beat a dead warg on how bad The Hobbit is. Lindsay Ellis already made a perfect trilogy of videos where she went to New Zealand and extensively investigated these films. Those videos are great, you should really watch them. So it's not surprising that The Hobbit was so bad because, I mean, look at how many beloved franchises Warner Brothers has managed to screw up.
Aurelius Dumbledore.
What, we some kind of suicide squad?
Save Martha!
Booyah.
What is extraordinary is that the Lord of the Rings trilogy managed to be so good, so perfect, and was largely free from the same studio interference that hobbled its sequel. So the question for me is, why? Why was the Lord of the Rings so good and the Hobbit so Hobbit? We could list off a million bad things about the Hobbit.
Aren't you going to search me? I could have anything down my trousers.
Or nothing.
And a million great things about Lord of the Rings.
You bow to no one.
But I think we can distill these movies into one very similar scene that sets the tone for each trilogy. One scene that shows why one of these movies was one of film's greatest achievements in technique and characterization that activated an international interest in fantasy stories, and why the other movie was this.
Boring.
And that one scene in both trilogies is the call to adventure. So first, I do want to give you a little background on the making of The Hobbit, because like you may not be up on all the studio politics or you haven't watched those Lindsay Ellis videos that I mentioned earlier. So after Return of the King was released, made a lot of money, won some Oscars, The Hobbit was then put in development for years. This is because the rights to this film were shared by about 5 different studios who had all been trying to develop the property into one film at some point. So the Guillermo del Toro was signed on to direct The Hobbit as one movie, and he actually moved his entire family to New Zealand for a year and a half while he developed this film.
Wow, Guillermo del Toro doing The Hobbit. That would have been awesome.
I know, right? But Warner Brothers wanted the movie to be very much like the look and feel of the Lord of the Rings trilogy. Essentially, they wanted to give the audience more of the same.
Lord of the Rings.
But Del Toro had his own vision for The Hobbit that didn't mesh with the studios, so he left. Now, Warner Brothers has a fixed release date, and they went to The Hobbit's producer, Peter Jackson. And you'll remember, Peter Jackson is the genius that directed and co-wrote the Lord of the Rings trilogy. So Warner Brothers tells Peter Jackson that they will move the production from New Zealand if he doesn't step in to direct the films. So Jackson agreed because he wanted to keep those jobs in his home country.
They took our jobs!
Now, the Lord of the Rings trilogy took years to develop as the crew created unique weapons and armor based on individual cultures. Sets were meticulously carved by hand. The plants in Hobbiton were grown a year in advance of filming. But for this movie, The Hobbit, Jackson was forced to hit the ground running. No script, no careful planning, no meticulous sets.
Is that why every background looks like a cartoon?
Yes, because everything was filmed on a green screen and then rushed together with CGI animation. And Warner Brothers really flexed their muscles, forcing Jackson to split these 2 films into 3 parts because they had to split the revenue of the first film with 4 other studios. So the studio has a lot of blame for how this trilogy turned out. But I will say that part of this blame is on Peter Jackson. He may have been forced into making 3 movies, but each movie didn't have to be 3 hours long. In his efforts to transform The Hobbit into a new Lord of the Rings trilogy, he added a lot of bloat that only copied the original film. They need a hot king like Aragorn, so this dwarf becomes hot. They needed a love story like Aragorn and Arwen, so this dwarf and this elf, I guess.
I could have anything down my trousers.
Why does it hurt so much?
Because it was real.
We don't have any black riders, but we have a rivalry with some albino orc. They also lifted random pieces of the score. That's the Ringwraith theme. The humans are tempted by the One Ring, so Thorin is tempted by the Arkenstone. And there's even a pointless Gandalf side quest to mirror his time away from Hobbiton in the first film. So, if you've read The Hobbit, you know that it's no Lord of the Rings. It is a very simple children's tale. It's not very violent, it's filled with songs and riddles, and we don't even see that final battle because the protagonist is unconscious. It's a sweet little tale that totally stands alone, and the movies are terrible adaptations of this story, mostly because they're boring.
And you're boring. And you're totally ordinary. And you know it.
And so that brings us to the one scene that makes these movies stand apart. Each of these scenes takes place in the first act of the film. And First acts are crucial to any movie. The first few minutes of a movie do all the heavy lifting. You have to introduce us to the characters, make us like the characters, get us to invest in the personal stakes of their lives, and then set the story into motion by giving them a motivation to change their circumstances. Think of how many great movies start with a kick-ass first act. John Wick, Star Wars, Paddington.
Shouldn't you be at home?
Oh yes, I should. But I haven't quite worked out how to find one.
So first let's look at the Fellowship of the Ring. And by the way, I'm only going to be talking about the theatrical versions of these movies, not the extended cuts. That way we have like a fair ground to compare them. Here's a breakdown of the first act of the theatrical version of Fellowship of the Ring. First we open with a prologue, which is kind of a staple in fantasy movies, narrating the ancient lore before meeting our heroes in the present. This prologue is a masterclass in exposition. The first minute is all devoted to tone. There's the studio files, and then a black screen with narration.
Much that once was is lost.
Followed by the title card. And then we see the forging of the Great Rings, which also introduces us to our narrator, Galadriel, and the various species of Middle-earth. They even get a shot in at men,
who above all else desire power.
Now notice how these are filmed, basically in a black box where the only thing illuminated are the characters, because, this is the past of legend. The details have been lost to the sands of time. This is also great for not confusing the audience. Jackson is saying to the viewer, look, all you have to know is that there are these magic rings. Don't worry about where these people are or what they're kings of or where they live. Here's the people, here's the rings, let's move on. Then we see a map of this world, showing us the setting as we move toward Mordor, just as the Fellowship is about to move toward Mordor. Then, in about 20 seconds, we learn all about Sauron and the One Ring. And the clips are all really fast, cross-fading into one another. Next, we see a montage using a map overlay to indicate how widespread this danger is. And then, 8 seconds later, we're at the war that ended the Second Age. Then, snippets of this big battle in Mordor, which foreshadows the end of Return of the King. Now, we don't really notice any distinct characters except for Elrond, because he's an important character for later on. I have to impress upon you how careful Jackson is to not overload us with information. He's also done a nice job of balancing out all that dialogue and exposition with a fun action scene right at the start of the film. So even in this short scene, we get all the tropes of the big battles yet to come in this series. There's two armies lining up, firing arrows, battles going well, followed by an all was lost moment with Sauron and the ring showing up. Showing these moments in quick succession is a lot like an overture of a musical, where the musical themes of the show are introduced to the audience before the curtain actually goes up. Now in the prologue, Isildur is the hero of this story, setting us up to think that Aragorn and Boromir will be our heroes later on, because we don't yet know how the ring corrupted Isildur's heart. The battle lasts 2 minutes and 10 seconds total. Isildur has the ring for about 20 seconds. Then there's about 2 minutes to sum up Gollum and Bilbo's adventure in The Hobbit. Now that's a few thousand years in the first 7 minutes of this movie, and 1 minute of that was just setting the tone of the age over a black screen. So Bilbo finding the ring introduces us to our real hero, Frodo Baggins. In Frodo's opening scene, we are wowed by the forced camera perspective to make Elijah Wood look so small. We meet Gandalf, and they establish an air of mystery about Bilbo.
He's up to something. All right, then keep your secrets.
The trip into Hobbiton is one of those magical movie moments where you get to see an exact translation from page to screen. So Frodo takes us to Gandalf, and Gandalf takes us to Bilbo, and right away, I know that something isn't right.
You haven't aged a day.
The scene sets up Bilbo's intentions.
I want to see mountains again. Mountains, Gandalf. And I don't expect I shall return.
Next is the party, which is just great fun. It introduces us to the world of the hobbits, to Sam.
Go on, Sam. Ask Rosie for a dance.
And to Merry and Pippin.
Supposed to stick it in the ground.
It is in the ground.
Outside.
That was your idea.
The party scene is only 4 minutes long, and it's a testament that it feels longer than that, but it also feels too short. In just 4 minutes, we've met most of our heroes, and we've been given some time to linger in Hobbiton. Now this all seems pleasant, but because of that prologue, we all know that there is a secret evil in the Shire. Bilbo puts on the ring at exactly 20 minutes into the movie, essentially erasing his story from the narrative and transitioning to Frodo. There's this scene.
Bilbo Baggins! Do not take me for some conjurer of cheap tricks.
And remember that scene for later. 3 minutes after Bilbo puts on the ring, exit Bilbo stage left and enter Frodo to safeguard the ring. And then we cut to the Nine emerging from Barad-dûr. The theoretical threat of the ring from the prologue has now become a very real threat as the Black Riders are hunting the countryside for the ring. This montage of the riders is intercut with Gandalf learning about the ring.
It is precious to me.
At minute 30, we get our classic Peter Jackson jump scare.
Is it secret? Is it safe?
And from here on out, the danger is clear.
One ring to rule them all. This is the One Ring. The spirit of Sauron endured.
And Frodo, to his credit, is very brave here. The first thing he does is decide to hide the ring, until we learn that Gollum has given up the location of his precious.
Sauron!
And now, the threat of the Black Riders is suddenly very real. Frodo tries to give the ring to Gandalf to escape this existential threat. This is the part of the hero's journey where the hero denies the call to adventure.
I'm giving it to you!
And Gandalf refuses to let Frodo back out.
Don't tempt me, Frodo!
Then it's super fast. Frodo packs his bags, and then we get this sweet moment where like little Frodo is all dressed up like he's going to his first day of school.
My dear Frodo, hobbits really are amazing creatures.
And then Sam joins the journey.
I've thought of a better use for you.
And at 36 minutes in, they are off. So 36 minutes in, and we have established this fantastical world, how an evil ring almost destroyed this world. We've been introduced to all the species of this world, most of our main characters, and even a couple of side elves. We even learned that men are tempted by the ring, which is going to be very important later on. We understand the imminent danger that the heroes face, and most importantly, we know that only Frodo can carry this burden because Gandalf would be tempted by the ring. But now we believe in Frodo because he's shown that he's brave. This 36 minutes doesn't just set up one movie, it sets up a 12-hour trilogy. Oh, and by minute 41, we also know about Saruman's betrayal, which means that Gandalf is now off the board, meaning that the hobbits are in even more danger than they realize. It's a perfect first act of a movie. So now, oh God, dear God, let's look at the first act of The Hobbit. But here's the thing, Fellowship. The Hobbit trilogy does have some outstanding qualities. In fact, a lot of what makes The Hobbit great is also what makes it bad. There's the returning actors like Ian McKellen and Andy Serkis. And on the bad side, we have returning actors like Orlando Bloom and Elijah Wood. I also enjoyed how this movie expanded on the book with stories like Bard and Lake Town Politics. But I also hated how they expanded on the book with Gandalf's side quest. But more on that in a little bit. First, I gotta praise Martin Freeman and Benedict Cumberbatch. They are the MVPs of this trilogy.
Gandalf, is this a good place to stand?
Where are you?
But if you were going to take a poll of like video essay channels and ask why the Hobbit trilogy was so bad, like the universal answer is that it was trying to be something that it wasn't. It was trying to be the Lord of the Rings. Lord of the Rings was a 12-hour epic adapted from a 480,000 word book, while The Hobbit was a 9-hour epic adapted from a 95,000 word book. And again, if you want to see these problems exemplified, let's just look at the first act of the first movie. Now, both Unexpected Journey and Fellowship of the Ring begin with an opening monologue to shade in the backstory. In The Hobbit, it's the story of the dwarves. And it goes on for so long. Remember how tidy that prologue to Fellowship was? It was 6 minutes long, and it set up Middle-earth, the different races, the rings, Sauron, and even showed the end of the Second Age. The prologue to Hobbit the Unexpected Journey is 9 minutes long. We start off with elderly Bilbo in the Shire writing his memoirs. Like, I guess this is to provide some connective tissue to the original movies, but you don't need it. It just feels like nostalgia when there really is no reason to have Bilbo start this story as narration. But you know what? They do play the music. Look, I love Ian Holm, so I guess I can allow this. It's still bad for reasons I'm going to go into in a second, but fine. This Hobbit prologue and title takes 2 minutes. Bilbo tells us the story of the King of the Mountain, Thorin's family, and this is all pretty cool. The dwarves build stuff, and they have a big kingdom, and they find the Arkenstone, which becomes my least favorite part of the movie. In the book, the Arkenstone is a very valuable jewel, but the movies reshaped it to become a temptation object like the One Ring that drove the king mad with greed. Now, in the book, you could say that Thorin is driven mad by greed, but it's not because of a magic rock, but it's that way in the movie because this is the Hobbit trying to be the Lord of the Rings.
A sickness had begun to grow within him.
But the hearts of men are easily corrupted.
Okay, so in this prologue, the king is corrupted by the Arkenstone. Lee Pace as the elf pays homage, and then the dragon comes. And the thing is, every background in this prologue is like rendered digitally and created at 60 frames per second instead of the usual 24 frames per second that we're used to. As a result, none of these environments feel real. This feels like it's all taking place in some kind of shiny, impossible, cartoony world. So we think of these characters as impossible cartoons that we can't relate to, which is a shame because the only only goal of this prologue is to make us feel empathy for the dwarves, but the digital environment makes that really hard to achieve. Now, compare this to the more theatrical opening of The Lord of the Rings, where characters are kept on black backgrounds, so we're not distracted by all the gee-whiz imagery like we see in The Hobbit. This is a major problem all through these movies, as practical sets were replaced with digital imagery because the production was so very rushed. Like very rushed. They were writing pages for most of the scenes on the same day they were supposed to film. This digital imagery in the opening is also too precise. We see too much detail. Because look, if you're an artist who spent hundreds of hours rendering a gold chamber, you're gonna make sure everyone can see every pixel of that treasure. But instead of creating a world that feels vibrant, it creates a world that feels fake. And then we see dwarves as refugees, so we can see them driven so low. And I guess this kind of works, but I don't really know who the dwarves are as individuals except for Thorin. And that is another problem that exists throughout all the movies. See, most of the dwarves are kind of silly. They're like the Merry and Pippins of this movie. So instead of giving us charming backstories and traits for these fun characters, the focus shifts entirely to the new Aragorn, Thorin, and to this weird love triangle between the dwarf and the elf.
I could have anything down my trousers.
Yeah, yep. Tolkien loved a dick joke. Everyone knows that. So this whole prologue is kind of ugly. It doesn't introduce us to the dwarves as characters, but it does introduce them like as a concept. But you know what? We get it. Dwarves are down on their luck. I think you could have done this all in a couple of minutes, but let's move on. Then, for some reason, next we see the events leading up to the beginning of Gandalf arriving in the Shire in Fellowship of the Ring. You ever wonder who hung up that party sign? It was Frodo. Ever wonder what Frodo was doing before he met Gandalf? Now you know.
East Farthing Woods. I'm going to surprise him.
Well, go on then.
These kind of scenes are the worst thing about prequels, like when we found out how Han Solo got his name.
I'm alone.
Solo.
And frankly, I think the problem all stems back to the worst Narnia book, The Magician's Nephew. There, I said it. Terrible book. Don't need it. Skip straight to Lion the Witch in the Wardrobe and move on. Okay, so this pointless scene between Ian Holm and Elijah Wood is only there for nostalgia and does nothing to further the story that we're actually watching. And this scene takes 3 minutes.
Be a good lad and put that on the gate.
Fellowship introduced Sauron, the rings, and ended the Second Age in just 4 minutes. But this movie just wastes time with cameos that have nothing to do with the story that we are actually watching. Choosing to present this Hobbit movie as a story told during the opening minutes of Fellowship of the Rings was a huge mistake, because it means that this is not a true prequel. You couldn't watch The Hobbit first without seeing Fellowship. The movies have to be viewed in the order of release. Anyways, I hate all of this. It's dumb fan service. This is a perfect example of a movie trying to please its fans instead of telling its story. And frankly, studios forcing fan service into movies is because of the internet. The internet has given filmmakers immediate, personal feedback on films, and this has ruined how movies are made. Instead of artists making films, it's studio executives reading fan feedback on social media. Unless, by the way, you're a studio executive watching this video, in which case, listen carefully to what I have to say. I have opinions that matter. So, this movie actually starts at 13 minutes in, when Gandalf meets Bilbo.
Good morning.
What do you mean? Do you mean to wish me a good morning, or do you mean that it is a good morning whether I want it or not?
Joseph Campbell created this monomyth that says that every single story begins with the hero being called to adventure.
I'm looking for someone to share in an adventure.
And then the hero's next step is to refuse that call, which happens here at 15 minutes in.
No, wait. We do not want any adventures here. Thank you. Not today.
God, I love Martin Freeman in this role. I really wish he would have been allowed to be the hero of his own movie. Alright, then around 1640, the dwarves show up. This takes a long time, but you know what? It should take a long time. We have 13 characters to introduce, and they all need some unique attribute to tell us who they are. Now, in the original films, the characters were introduced at the Council of Elrond, which gave every member of the Fellowship a chance to react to the One Ring in their own way.
Let us use it against him.
The ring must be destroyed.
And I suppose you think you're the one to do it.
Now, some of these dwarves are great, but some of them are trying to be Aragorn and are way too handsome.
I could have anything down my trousers.
But the movie does not use this space wisely to give all the dwarves a characteristic that we can remember. Instead, even Gandalf can't keep them straight. But as they take over Bilbo's house, the movie's great fun.
Tad, excessive, isn't it? You got a cheese knife?
Cheese knife. He eats it by the block.
But another major problem with the Hobbit trilogy is its tonal shifts. Sometimes it wants to be a cartoon kids movie, like the barrel scene. Other times it's trying to win an Oscar.
Why does it hurt so much?
Because it was real.
And these problems with tonal shifts are present in this first scene. The cartoon CGI dishwashing takes us completely out of the reality of the movie and lays the groundwork for awful moments like Legolas defying gravity in the Battle of the Five Armies. Now look, I know all of these scenes deal with magic and elves and stuff, but the overuse of CGI also bends the rules of reality so far that the world loses any credibility. It's the difference between this and this. And then, oh boy, this is taking a long time. Thorin shows up at about 25 minutes in, and then we get to hear a bit about dwarf politics.
What news from the meeting in Ered Luin?
Did they all come?
Aye, envoys from all 7 kingdoms. What of the dwarves of the Iron?
2 minutes later, Bilbo gets information that we've now been told twice.
The Barons of Yor return to Erebor, the reign of the beast.
And then Thorin has to convince them all to go to the mountain.
Do we seize this chance to take back Erebor?
Which is silly because they went to get Bilbo because they had already decided to go to the mountain. But they needed to give Thorin an Aragorn moment.
Because he's the leader.
Exactly. And by the way, there's another thing in this scene that really annoys me, right here.
Enough if I say Bilbo Baggins is a burglar and a burglar he is.
Okay, so this is another nostalgia moment, which is playing off the time Gandalf yelled at Bilbo for accusing him of stealing his ring.
Do not take me for some conjurer of cheap tricks.
It makes sense for Gandalf to yell at Bilbo in that scene because it relates to the ring. Here it's like they're just using this moment to call back to the moment we've already seen Gandalf yell at people inside this house. Alright, so then moving on. Bilbo likes to read maps, and at 31 minutes in, they offer him a job, and he says no. This is the second time he has refused the call to adventure, and he does it again in 1 minute.
Nope.
And then Gandalf tells him a sweet story about his ancestor, which softens Bilbo's heart, and he says,
"You've got the wrong Hobbit."
Then the dwarves sing another song.
The misty mountains cold.
So they're singing about the prologue that we just saw. This is silly. The movie should have opened with Bilbo meeting Gandalf, and then we all should have learned about the dwarves' backstory from this song. And the plight of these people is still not enough to move Bilbo to sign the damn contract. And then the next morning he wakes up, sees the contract, says F it.
I'm going on an adventure!
There's no reason for Bilbo to change his mind here except so Peter Jackson can get the shot of Martin Freeman running through Hobbiton at minute 40. So Bilbo denies the call to adventure 5 times. We spent like 10 minutes with the dwarves and know something about maybe 2 of them, and we have no idea why Bilbo even decided to go on this quest. This is a sloppy, rambling opening act that sets the tone for all of the flaws that become apparent later on in the series. The first act of an unexpected journey is like seeing the small cracks in the ground before an earthquake happens and swallows your childhood whole. I actually have a proposal on how to fix this opening, so here's my proposed change. Bilbo's chilling by his house. Gandalf shows up. The dwarves show up. They sing songs. They're rowdy. Bilbo doesn't understand what's happening. They need a burglar. Bilbo says no. And then, through their song, they reveal a flashback of their story. Both Bilbo and the audience learn this at the same time, because he is the protagonist and we are seeing the story through his eyes. And this is opposed to the movie, where an older version of the protagonist tells his nephew about the time some dwarves showed up and told him a story. Anyways, the song will move Bilbo's heart, so he signs the contract and joins up. This shows us that Bilbo is a kind, sympathetic person. And by the way, this happens on page 16 of the book. Listen. As they sang, the Hobbit felt the love of beautiful things made by hands, and by cunning and by magic moving through him, a fierce and jealous love, the desire of the hearts of dwarves. And then something tookish woke up inside of him, and he wished to go and see the great mountains, and hear the pine trees and the waterfalls, and explore the caves, and wear a sword instead of a walking stick. And that is how, in the book, Bilbo decides to join the company of the dwarves. Now, if you were to just make these changes and total up this time, it comes out to about 18 minutes, which is not too shabby for a first act. And if this structure sounds familiar, it's because this is exactly how the Rankin and Bass animated Hobbit movie played out in 1977, where it only took 8 minutes. So look, I'm not just picking on this first act because it's bad. It also exemplifies everything wrong with the whole trilogy. Ugly effects, bad characterization, wasted time, a rambling story, over-reliance on nostalgia, and all of that is apparent in Act 1 of this movie. And it's all because this movie trilogy did not adapt The Hobbit. It adapted a different movie trilogy. And another thing, Gandalf spends the whole movie learning that Sauron is alive. So why is he so surprised that Sauron is alive in Fellowship of the Ring? And another thing, the Arkenstone does not cause dragon sickness. It's just a very valuable stone. The Arkenstone is only in the movie because they wanted Thorin to be tempted by the magic rock like Aragorn Aragorn was tempted by the magic ring. But the entire point of this story is that people in the world are too greedy, and that Bilbo was the one person who understood the right way to live your life.
If more of us valued your ways, food and cheer above hoarded gold, it would be a merrier world.
And actually, maybe that's the best part of the Hobbit trilogy. The moral of this original story is that greed is bad, and the studio made these bad movies out of greed. Oh, but wait, if that was on purpose, then this movie is the greatest, most expensive postmodern art installation ever created. In which case, thumbs up. But that's just my thoughts on the Hobbit trilogy. If you have any, let me know in the comments below, or feel free to @ me on Twitter. And if it's your first time here, please subscribe, smash that bell for alerts. For ScreenCrush, I'm Ryan Airy.